So this article was suggested by our own Harvey Castro, essentially saying that early pipeline, which is very important because you're not talking about pipeline, framework is very important so that there's a clear framework for vendor AI solutions to support return on investment. And this is very important. So you are the ED physician, Harvey, and you're one of the best speakers and startup founders and everything. What is the importance of frameworks when you are designing, especially with your past experience as an ED physician and care? Give us a little bit of insight from the clinical perspective, and then we're going to go into their framework and why it is important.
Yeah. So one of my favorite phrases: "We don't know what we don't know," right? And that's why we're at this panel. Think about it. We have all these amazing leaders. We have Ed, we have you, myself, and we're thinking, but combined, we're adding value. And so what if, as an ER doctor, I'm focused and I'm hyper-focused on just the ER world? I don't know which way to pivot to do. All I know is that I'm working on my patient. So this is why I love this paper, because it literally maps out that framework. Like, what do I need to do forward? And how do I make sure that all this works so that I can ultimately, for me, take care of my patient? And so I can't wait to jump into this framework. I'll just start off with, and I like the way they started. Number one, strategic alignment. What does that even mean? Does the case move towards the board level goals? You see, this is where it's a great conversation. I love that it's here, because from the front lines in the ER world, I'm focused on the patient, and there are certain metrics that I am focused on. But the C-suite may have overlap, but they have others. And so right on day one, we got to make sure that aligns, because if it doesn't, let's just say the C-suite takes over and says, "Hey, doctor, you're going to do X." But I'm like, "Hey, wait a second. We need Y. This is more important than what you're trying to get me to do." Right off the bat, that mismatch is going to create so much tension that maybe the ER may revolt and say, "Sorry, we're not going to do that to our workflow." And now you have spent all this money and all this time into something. Or the flip, ER says, "Hey, we're going to do this." And C-suite says, "Sorry, there is no money for that."
One thing I would just, add is that you need to make sure the right people, though, are helping drive those decisions. And it should be very clinician-led. So I've seen a lot of academic exercises where we come up with a great framework and we put what we think are the right people, but they're all administrators and they're not practitioners. And then that's when there's a misalignment, or when implementation happens. I know I'm jumping ahead, but when execution happens, it fails. Why? Because we didn't include the people that actually know the processes and live this day to day. So that's something really important in here that needs to be driven home. It's not just the executive sponsorship, but are the right people at the table.
And I love this. I always say it's a village, right? Somebody posted this Venn diagram, and it showed like all these circles of how AI in healthcare is working. But one of the biggest spots that they left out was the patient. And I'm like, whoa, we're doing all this for the patient. So on this thing, what you just said, we need to make sure that we have the patients involved, that they're actually part of this decision process, because they'll see things from their angle that we may miss.
Yeah. So, well, to Harvey's point, I included a patient on my governance teams, and I don't know many people who do, but I highly recommend it. It was so important. And don't pick a patient that is highly involved with tech because it'll skew it too much towards tech. You just want your average patient on that committee. So if you can swing that, there's no reason why you can't. That should be done. And patients love it. Whenever we've had patients as part of our governance committee, they love to volunteer. They want to give back. They're grateful. And their voice is super, super important, just as the clinician. So yeah, the executive sponsor, I sort of break this down into two different ways. One is you do want to have an executive that sits, ideally on the C-suite, so that they can make sure, provide good oversight, but also shepherd the way and sort of grease the skids, if you will, to make sure that as this thing goes through the approval process, that it's getting the right attention. But the other thing that I always look for in an executive sponsor is, I call it the informal sponsor. These are typically clinicians, especially if we're talking about a clinician adoption here of an AI solution. These are clinicians who may not have a formal title, but are the informal leaders. Everyone listens to these clinicians. And if you do not include their voice and give them, the visibility you're gonna maybe misalign, or you're gonna not have the adoption that you're hoping to have. So that's a critical thing, is to make sure that you have the informal leaders absolutely engaged.
Harvey, I'm going to ask you to take it more forward from executive sponsorship to multi-holder risk assessment.
Yeah. So I hate to say the same phrase again, but again, we don't know what we don't know, right? So having a framework that helps identify and tell us, hey, what are some of these multi-stakeholder risk assessments, and how can we look at it? So I'm going to just read from the slide. I mean, it's really smart. I mean, we're looking at a very structured approach. We're going to look at the actual evaluation of the clinical operation. And this is why I find this interesting. Even if today Ed and I are working at hospital X, and there's a certain workflow, that doesn't mean that applies at all the hospitals, which is really interesting because different hospitals have different populations, different people, and as a result, different problems. And what may work at plan A may not work at hospital B. And so looking at that operation will be interesting. Obviously, huge HIPAA compliance or security. We know that all this information is very delicate, and there's people out there that are literally trying to see where are you going to mess up in this flow and where can they monetize on it. So we need to make sure that from security point of view, that's also top priority. The other part I love here is it talks about through engagement with various experts. I'll use the phrase again, we don't know what we don't know, but if we bring in an expert that opens our eyes to X, Y, and Z, now we're seeing, okay, crap, we really need to address this issue.
No, I agree completely. We want to, you have one shot. It's all about credibility, and you have one shot. You got to do this right, because if you can get a win, then the next time you present or have an idea, you're more than likely going to get approved. And I've seen that happen so many times over the years. One last thing that's really important is who presents. So it's great to have this framework, but at the end of the day, who presents the solution is it should be, again, if we're talking a clinical type of situation here, it needs to be a clinician. So as proud as I am, and proud of my teams and things like that, I didn't want to be the person that ultimately presents something that is beneficial primarily for a clinician or the patient. I wanted that to come from the executive sponsor or the informal executive sponsor that we spoke about. This is super powerful.
Love it. I'm going to go talk about a little bit of impact and value. So number one is define. And this is so freaking important. People, I get as an entrepreneur or founder, I get a lot of things. And I first thing I ask is, how do you define success and how do you define failure? People may still be able to define success, but they are unable to define failure at all. And then the idea is that even in a startup, you have to pivot. So impact is so important that you define, and they have a proper strategy to measure and monitor expected value of the outcome of AI. I'm going to go ahead and then work through the sheet that they have given us and then go from there. So executive summary is extremely important. So they have used ambient AI scribe, which by the way, we have ISAMD from Save Life AI, which is one of the products that we offer. But the idea is to summarize or propose AI solution. And then this is extremely important to make it brief, provide a brief description, etc. Applications. And then again, application also defines where you're going to apply it. Are you going to apply it in outpatient setting, ER setting, inpatient setting? Are you going to apply it for nurses, physical therapists, occupational therapists? How are you going to design it? So the idea is to be brief and make sure that you use it properly in terms of defining the word application itself so that executive can move forward progressively. Background and problem statement. So for example, the biggest problem is you're the essentially the CEO of a hospital, actually CEO of an imaging center. And then the problem really that you have is that the problem solution that I'm presenting right now is that we need to identify better process in terms of improving the overall radiology reporting and increase it significantly, because the problem becomes is that you are not able to do this. Now you have to beautifully present that. Background and problem statement. You talk about current situation, need for AI automation. We did the current situation. We need the AI. Stakeholders impacted. And that's very important. Which one are they? Are they patients? Are they clinicians? Are they operations? Are they finance? So therefore you have to hit those. So we talk about patients and clinicians mainly. And then of course, in my situation, the IT administrators are going to be impacted. So we always write down that there has seamless PACS integration. Again, thinking of all the stakeholders is extremely important when you are doing this analysis for any AI. Again, application use cases, these are the use cases. And then you also talk about solutions landscape. So reviews existing market solutions or vendors that partially or fully meet the business needs. And that is also important. And people shy away with that. And I don't. I mean, of course, I'm not going to put it in my introduction, but what I'm saying is that it's important for them to understand that, hey, this is a competitive landscape. What you bring additional value in terms of your solution. And that's very important to say. Of course, not printed, but listen. So for example, I can clearly say that there are 3 different other solutions in the market. The reason that we are better is because it is in decreased latency, increased accuracy, seamless PACS integration, and most importantly, provides a beautiful, plain English summary for the patients to act on that result or not act because then because it will decrease the phone call itself. Because they're going to say, okay, what does that mean? In no intracerebral, no intracranial hemorrhage, or no intracranial pathology. What does that mean? Your brain does not have any problem. That is why how you say it. So that's how you actually present that, hey, there are competition and there should be. By the way, I'm just going to be very honest with you. Anyone who's starting a healthcare startup needs to understand that you need to start with a market and then do innovation because you need to understand. So now, this is some of these things that we want to go through. And this is when you are designing a proposal, that what is the text accuracy, coding accuracy, user satisfaction, scalability, integrations, implementation, licensing costs, etc. What we do is we actually tell them the major features, that there is a personalization studio. Then there is, relevance. Then there is care team connect, because if you have you're in academic setting, then you have a resident, a fellow, and then an attending. So you need a collaborative editing approach. That's how you actually show them that these are things that we support your workflows. Also tell us about the integration process. Very simple, easy. Show them with pictures. Show them the ROI, but here's the metrics. Hey, if there's a huge log report, for example, echocardiogram, how are you going to save them time? You also have to tell them that what kind of accuracies are there, what you have done, and you can show those results, that this is each and every section has different, and then you can show them exactly time reduction per report, time saved per report. So when this thing comes up, as you can see, it is important that you also tell that in the solution landscape, that how you actually did this and how you're expecting it. And then, of course, when you come down in an actual real world environment, you end up basically showing this as you go along. Then you actually, section 4, you actually go ahead, success likelihood. And that's the thing that we want you to understand, that when there's executives are looking at these solutions, they are looking at this. What is the proposed solution? What is the success likelihood? And then application and use case. And then they look at the value proposition and then look at the baseline metrics, like how many reports are being generated out of my imaging center. What is the time to report? Is it less than 1 week? It is more than 2 weeks. So they're going to look at the baseline metrics, and then they're going to do the cost analysis and say, if I add this additional software and it decreases the time to reporting by X days, and therefore I can add multiple, different imaging devices, looking at the space itself of the imaging center. I mean, you can say, okay, well, you can do 3 more devices. They don't even have a space to put on it. So they actually go ahead and look at all of this and then go from there. So I love this paper in that regard, that it goes through the whole process, how executives think and how they move forward. And this is very important, in my opinion, for everyone to understand. Because if you are designing a solution, you have to design for integration. You have to design for workflow optimization, and then you have to show that value to the people who are doing this. And if you actually do this beforehand as a vendor, you're going to decrease the overall time, and this will significantly create a massive impact in terms of your winning any contracts as well. But who cares about contracts? Again, we believe if you save a life, it is as if you save a life of all mankind. And that is extremely important. Again, simple. I've seen people like bleeding out of their brains with a small cavernoma and just waiting for surgeries. As a matter of fact, it took 20 days to read that cavernoma. It was annoying. So it is extremely important that we provide faster care, because it does impact actual lives In my opinion, I have 2 patients die because of a cavernoma bleed and then move from there. Ethics, access, fairness, and clinical engagement. So this is one thing that I personally struggle with, because the hype versus this. The problem is that there's so much freaking hype out there that it's just their expectation is very low. And being ethical, we want to make sure that we are 100% accurate, which we can do a lot through generative AI. But then we cannot 100% confirm accuracy as a vendor. And what are your thoughts on that, Harvey? Like, where do you draw the line of pushing, I don't know, experimentation would be the right word or not? How do you approach that, number one, as a vendor, and number two, as a solution reviewer?
Yeah, this is kind of why I love when I do my TED Talks, because it gives me a chance to influence the culture per se. People are scared of what they don't know, right? And by having some tool like a TED Talk, I can kind of use that to the C-suite and be like, hey, look at this and look at this perspective. And the reason I'm going into this is because I am seeing some interesting applications outside of the US that they're doing, and I don't see it here in the US. And I really think it's this, and it involves the ethics. Why aren't we doing it here? And is it a cost? And where is it? So to your point, this application, I love how you're doing it. It's edge technology. It's helping. It's bringing the costs down for our patients, because ultimately, yes, we have high bills, but who's paying the bills? It's the patient through insurances and whatnot. So on the ethical side, I'm really excited to see that this application doesn't just apply here in the US. It literally applies all over the world. So that's my thoughts.